Chapter 16, A Plan and a Narrow Escape. Dick unbolted the door at the top and bottom and flung it open. He rushed in and thumped George and Julian happily on the back. "Hello," he said. "How does it feel to be rescued?" "Fine," cried Julian, and Tim barked madly round them. George grinned at Dick. "Good work," she said. "What happened?" Dick told them in a few words all that had happened. When he related how he had climbed down the old well, George and Julian could hardly believe their ears. Julian slipped his arm through his younger brother's. "You're a brick," he said, "a real brick. Now quick, what are we going to do?" "Well, if they've left us our boat, I'm going to take us all back to the mainland as quickly as possible," said George. "I'm not playing about with men who brandish revolvers all the time. Come on, up the well we go and find the boat." They ran to the well shaft and squeezed through the small opening one by one. Up the rope they went and soon found the iron ladder. Julian made them go up one by one in case the ladder wouldn't bear the weight of all three at once. It really wasn't very long before they were all up in the open air once more, giving Anne hugs and hearing her exclaim gladly, with tears in her eyes, how pleased she was to see them all again. "Now, come on," said George after a minute. "Off to the boat, quick. Those men may come back at any time." They rushed to the cove. There was their boat, lying where they had pulled it, out of reach of the waves. But what a shock for them. "They've taken the oars," said George in dismay. "The beasts! They know we can't row the boat away without oars. They were afraid you and Anne might row off, Dick. So instead of bothering to tow the boat behind them, they just grabbed the oars. Now we're stuck. We can't possibly get away." It was a great disappointment. The children were almost ready to cry. After Dick's marvellous rescue of George and Julian, it had seemed as if everything was going right. And now, suddenly, things were going wrong again. "We must think this out," said Julian, sitting down, where he could see at once if any boat came in sight. "The men have gone off, probably to get a ship from somewhere in which they can put the ingots and sail away. They won't be back for some time, I should think, because you can't charter a ship all in a hurry, unless, of course, they've got one of their own. And in the meantime, we can't get off the island to get help because they've got our oars," said George. "We can't even signal to any passing fishing boat because they won't be out just now. The tide's wrong. It seems as if all we've got to do is wait here patiently till the men come back and take my gold, and we can't stop them." "You know, I've got a sort of plan coming into my head," said Julian slowly. "Wait a bit, don't interrupt me. I'm thinking." The others waited in silence, while Julian sat and frowned, thinking of his plan. Then he looked at the others with a smile. "I believe it will work," he said. "Listen, we'll wait here in patience till the men come back. What will they do? They'll drag away those stones at the top of the dungeon entrance and go down the steps. They'll go to the storeroom where they left us, thinking we are still there, and they will go into the room. Well, what about one of us being hidden down there, ready to bolt them into the room? Then we can either go off in their motorboat or our own boat, if they bring back our oars, and get help." Anne thought it was a marvellous idea, but Dick and George did not look so certain. "We'd have to go down and bolt that door again to make it seem as if we are still prisoners there," said George. "And suppose the one who hides down there doesn't manage to bolt the men in? It might be very difficult to do that quickly enough. They will simply catch whoever we plan to leave down there and come up to look for the rest of us." "That's true," said Julian thoughtfully. "Well, we'll suppose that Dick, or whoever goes down, doesn't manage to bolt them in and make them prisoners, and the men come up here again. All right, while they're down below, we'll pile big stones over the entrance, just as they did. Then they won't be able to get out." "What about Dick down below?" said Anne at once. "I could climb up the well again," said Dick eagerly. "I'll be the one to go down and hide. I'll do my best to bolt the men into the room, and if I have to escape, I'll climb up the well shaft again. The men don't know about that, so even if they're not prisoners in the dungeon room, they'll be prisoners underground." The children talked over this plan, and decided that it was the best they could think of. Then George said she thought it would be a good thing to have a meal. They were all half-starved, and now that the worry and excitement of being rescued was over, they were feeling very hungry. They fetched some food from the little room and ate it in the cove, keeping a sharp lookout for the return of the men. After about 2 hours, they saw a big fishing smack appear in the distance and heard the chug-chug-chug of a motorboat too. "There they are," said Julian in excitement, and he jumped to his feet. "That's the ship they mean to load with the ingots and sail away in safety. And there's the motorboat bringing the men back. Quick, Dick, down the well you go, and hide until you hear them in the dungeons." Dick shot off. Julian turned to the others. "We'll have to hide," he said. "Now that the tide is out, we'll hide over there, behind those uncovered rocks. I don't somehow think the men will do any hunting for Dick and Anne, but they might. Come on, quick." They all hid themselves behind the rocks and heard the motorboat come chugging into the tiny harbour. They could hear men calling to one another. There sounded to be more than 2 men this time. Then the men left the inlet and went up the low cliff towards the ruined castle. Julian crept behind the rocks and peeped to see what the men were doing. He felt certain that they were pulling away the slabs of stone that had been piled on top of the entrance to prevent Dick and Anne going down to rescue the others. "George, come on," called Julian in a low tone. "I think the men have gone down the steps into the dungeons now. We must go and try and put those big stones back. Quick!" George, Julian, and Anne ran softly and swiftly to the old courtyard of the castle. They saw that the stones had been pulled away from the entrance to the dungeons. The men had disappeared. They had plainly gone down the steps. The 3 children did their best to tug at the heavy stones to drag them back, but their strength was not the same as that of the men, and they could not manage to get any very big stones across. They put 3 smaller ones, and Julian hoped the men would find them too difficult to move from below. "If only Dick has managed to bolt them into that room," he said to the others. "Come on, back to the well now. Dick will have to come up there because he won't be able to get out of the entrance." They all went to the well. Dick had removed the old wooden cover and it was lying on the ground. The children leaned over the hole of the well and waited anxiously. What was Dick doing? They could hear nothing from the well, and they longed to know what was happening. There was plenty happening down below. The 2 men and another had gone down into the dungeons, expecting, of course, to find Julian, George, and the dog still locked up in the storeroom with the ingots. They passed the well shaft, not guessing that an excited small boy was hidden there, ready to slip out of the opening as soon as they had passed. Dick heard them pass. He slipped out of the well opening and followed behind quietly, his feet making no sound. He could see the beams made by the men's powerful torches, and with his heart thumping loudly, he crept along the smelly old passages between great caves until the men turned into the wide passage where the store cave lay. "Here it is," Dick heard one of the men say as he flashed his torch onto the great door. "The gold's in there, so are the kids." The men unbolted the door at top and bottom. Dick was glad that he had slipped along to bolt the door, for if he hadn't done that before the men had come, they would have known that Julian and George had escaped and would have been on their guard. The man opened the door and stepped inside. The second man followed him. Dick crept as close as he dared, waiting for the 3rd man to go in too. Then he meant to slam the door and bolt it. The first man swung his torch round and gave a loud exclamation. "The children are gone! How strange! Where are they?" 2 of the men were now in the cave, and the 3rd stepped in at that moment. Dick darted forward and slammed the door. It made a crash that went echoing round and round the caves and passages. Dick fumbled with the bolts, his hand trembling. They were stiff and rusty. The boy found it hard to shoot them home in their sockets, and meanwhile the men were not idle. As soon as they heard the door slam, they spun round. The third man put his shoulder to the door at once and heaved hard. Dick had just got one of the bolts almost into its socket. Then all three men forced their strength against the door, and the bolt gave way. Dick stared in horror. The door was opening. He turned and fled down the dark passage. The men flashed their torches on and saw him. They went after the boy at top speed. Dick fled to the well shaft. Fortunately, the opening was on the opposite side, and he could clamber into it without being seen in the light of the torches. The boy only just had time to squeeze through into the shaft before the three men came running by. Not one of them guessed that the runaway was squeezed into the well shaft they passed. Indeed, the men did not even know that there was a well there. Trembling from head to foot, Dick began to climb the rope he had left dangling from the rungs of the iron ladder. He undid it when he reached the ladder itself, for he thought that perhaps the men might discover the old well and try to climb up later. They would not be able to do that if there was no rope hanging down. The boy climbed up the ladder quickly and squeezed round the stone slab near the top. The other children were there waiting for him. They knew at once by the look on Dick's face that he had failed in what he had tried to do. They pulled him out quickly. "It was no good," said Dick, panting with his climb. "I couldn't do it. They burst the door open just as I was bolting it and chased me. I got into the shaft just in time." "They're trying to get out of the entrance now," cried Anne suddenly. "Quick, what shall we do? They'll catch us all." "To the boat," shouted Julian, and he took Anne's hand to help her along. "Come along, it's our only chance. The men will perhaps be able to move those stones." The four children fled down the courtyard. George darted into the little stone room as they passed it and caught up an axe. Dick wondered why she bothered to do that. Tim dashed along with them, barking madly. They came to the cove. Their own boat lay there without oars. The motorboat was there too. George jumped into it and gave a yell of delight. "Here are our oars. Take them, Julian. I've got a job to do here. Get the boat down to the water, quick." Julian and Dick took the oars. Then they dragged their boat down to the water, wondering what George was doing. All kinds of crashing sounds came from the motorboat. "George, George, quick, the men are out," suddenly yelled Julian. He had seen the three men running to the cliff that led down to the cove. George leapt out of the motorboat and joined the others. They pushed their boat out onto the water, and George took the oars at once, pulling for all she was worth. The three men ran to their motorboat, and they paused in the greatest dismay, for George had completely ruined it. She had chopped wildly with her axe at all the machinery she could see, and now the boat could not possibly be started. It was damaged beyond any repair the men could make with the few tools they had. "You wicked girl," yelled Jake, shaking his fist at George. "Wait till I get you." "I'll wait," shouted back George, her blue eyes shining dangerously. "And you can wait too. You won't be able to leave my island now."